weird wedding. Old Shun, remember to have a wedding reception after get off work on the second floor of Iyun Hotel. I was working overtime and was almost exhausted when my colleague Wang Jia suddenly walked to my desk and left with a few words. Looking at Wang Jia gradually disappearing into the background at the end of the corridor, my mind froze. I remembered that I had a falling out with Wang Jia half a year ago and vowed not to have any contact with each other until death. However, I never expected that he would come to me for a wedding banquet when we got married, and he was not afraid that I would ruin the wedding. My heart suddenly warmed up, and I thought that I must give Wang Jia a huge amount of money. When I got off work at 5:30 in the afternoon, it started to rain at some point. The streets that were originally bustling with cars were reduced by half due to the weather. There were billowing dark clouds in the sky, and the street lamps on the roadside cast their faint light on the ground in the dark rain. I thought to myself that I would probably be squeezing the bus today, so I stuffed my briefcase under my arm and then stretched out my hand to hail a taxi. I didn't see anything clearly, so I hurriedly got into the car, fearing that the rain would get on me. Go to a Yuan hotel. After saying that, I huddled in my seat tiredly and closed my tired eyelids. The sound of pattering rain could be heard in my ears. I only said one sentence, and there was no other sound in the carriage. It was so quiet that I couldn't even hear the driver's breathing. All you can hear is the sound of turning the steering wheel, setting the clock, and pressing the brakes. Just as the taxi was slowly approaching the Yuan Hotel, the elderly driver suddenly asked me, "Young man, I see that you are all lazy. You are still exuding black bad luck on such a gloomy, rainy day. I am afraid that you have encountered something unclean recently." The driver's words immediately triggered the inner universe in me. I was happily attending my colleague's wedding, but then I met a stranger who told me that I was going to encounter a ghost recently, which is really unlucky. I curled my lips, opened my eyes, looked at the driver's eyes flashing in the front mirror, and said aloud, "What are you talking about? I'm from your company, so I'll file a complaint against you." I glared at him angrily and stopped talking. The taxi also stopped here. I put 100 yuan on my clothes and threw it on the passenger seat and hurriedly got out of the car. Just as the door was closing, the old driver, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly turned around and raised his head slightly, revealing his complete appearance. He opened his mouth and said calmly, "I am from Xingjia Company. My name is Xue. If you need anything, you can come to me." After saying that, I closed the car window and drove through the sudden heavy rain. Standing in the rain shelter of the hotel, I felt that every pore in my body was widening, exuding a feeling of fear and uneasiness. Recalling that what was revealed under the curtain just now was a pale and unstable face with bloodshot eyes, sunken features, and irregular wrinkles tightly intertwined together, like a person who had just been in a car accident and had his flesh mashed together casually. When I woke up, I immediately shook my head, but the ghost-like face in my mind could not be forgotten for a long time. Throughout the lively dinner, all I saw were strangers whom I didn't know. I had no memory at all, but I kept being drunk. I didn't know where Wang Jia bought the wine. The brand was one I had never seen before, and even the taste was a little weird. Because the crowd was so busy, I immediately forgot all about the driver just now. But I'm a little confused. Isn't today Wang Jia's wedding? Why did they keep standing aside eating quietly, and no one came forward to bless and toast? It seemed that everyone gathered around me, calling them my classmates from junior high school and high school. It's been a long time since I last saw them. I stretched out my hand and pinched the sancha point on my forehead. It felt a little painful. It seemed that I was really old and I didn't even recognize my old classmates. Chapter 2, Yuan Cemetery. It was only when I was being fed to the point of breaking out that I was let go by these old classmates. I was holding the wine glass in one hand, walking unsteadily on my 2 feet, and could only hold on to the chair with difficulty with my other hand. Walking to Wang Jia, he was happily whispering to the bride. It was not just an illusion or something. When Wang Jia and the bride turned their heads, their faces were all covered with thick, even their lips. I was muttering to myself what the fuss was about, and Wang Jia suddenly reached out for a glass of wine, and the two of us clinked a glass. I drank it in a daze and then pulled Wang Jia to have a conversation. Stinky boy, you still remember me, your brother since childhood. Just because of the promotion half a year ago, you haven't ignored me for a long time, but still, you have a conscience and no. Call me when you get married. Brother, I'll give you a big red envelope. Red envelope. I said and stuffed the red envelope into Wang Jia's hand. Wang Jia took the red envelope stiffly against the red background. His face was so pale that I couldn't bear to look at it. But after I finished speaking, he just opened his mouth randomly, trying to say something. There was a buzzing in my ears, and I couldn't hear anything else. Then a group of people came to drag Wang Jia into the bridal chamber. Just when I was about to fall asleep, a harsh sound suddenly filled my ears. Run, 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 quick. It sounded very familiar, especially Wang Jia's voice. I felt confused, and without thinking about it, I fell into a deep sleep. I woke up from the cold. When I opened my eyes, a drop of rain just fell into my eyes. I cursed uncomfortably and then sat up. A cold wind blew on me, and I was so cold that I wrapped myself in a suit. I looked around and found that the surrounding area was surrounded by tall, dense forests. I said to myself, this is strange. Why am I here? After recalling the memory of last night, I found that I couldn't remember anything. At this time, the phone in my pocket suddenly vibrated. I took it out and saw it was from Li Fei, so I took it. Where have you been? Why haven't you come to work at this hour? The boss is here. Do you want to be fired? Li Fei roared on the other end of the phone. I was walking on the path in the dense forest, rubbed my ears, and said impatiently, you kid, you don't know I drank last night. Why don't you give me a day off? Li Fei was chattering, and after hearing what I said, he immediately retorted, where did you go and drink so much? I was stunned and asked in confusion, if you didn't go to Wang Jia's wedding yesterday? Are you crazy? 2 days ago, Wang Jia's flight to immigrate abroad was in an accident. His whole family died on the plane. Where did you drink the wedding wine? Li Fei's words pierced my heart one by one. I felt like I had been hit hard on the head, and suddenly I felt creepy on my back. Okay, I'll go to the company right away and contact you later. I heard Li Fei on the other end shouting, speak clearly, and hung up. Looking at the cold wind blowing in the dense forest, I immediately quickened my pace. After walking a few steps, something even more surprising happened to me. Rows of tombstones were arranged tightly and neatly in front of me. My mouth opened in surprise. It was a rainy day, but it made me feel particularly uncomfortable. I obviously went to Yuan Hotel last night. Why did he wake up in the cemetery the next day? I suddenly thought of what Li Fei said just now. Wang Jia's family died on the plane. Chapter 3, asking for help. Fear suddenly surged into my heart, and my ears buzzed as if they were exploding. I couldn't hear any sound. I held my phone tremblingly and ran to the entrance of the cemetery immediately. Along the way, bursts of coldness flew into my heart. I hailed a taxi and left in a hurry. When I turned the corner, I suddenly discovered that the sign on the entrance to the cemetery read, Yuan Cemetery. Looking at the glass, I could see my frightened, pale and bloodless face, and I couldn't help biting my lips. When I returned to the company, I felt like I was in a dream. I couldn't help but think of what the ferocious looking driver said to me last night. Young man, I see that you are lazy all over. You are still exuding black bad luck on such a gloomy, rainy day. I am afraid that you will encounter something unclean recently. I couldn't help but break into a cold sweat. Li Fei happened to be walking towards me. When he saw me, he immediately grabbed my shoulder and asked me, "Are you crazy? Where did you attend Wang Jia's wedding?" At this time, I was so frightened that I felt like my whole body had been drained. I said tremblingly, I don't know. Yesterday, Wang Jia suddenly came to me, asked me to attend the wedding, said to go to Yuan, so I went. After I finished speaking, Li Fei's face suddenly turned pale. Oh my God, Yuan is a cemetery, not a hotel. How do you go back there? Every word Li Fei said was like a needle piercing my heart. I was very sure that the person I saw yesterday was Wang Jia himself. A kind of belated fear came over me. My head kept shaking, and I could only support myself with my arms. When my mind went blank, I suddenly remembered the strange driver I met yesterday. I didn't expect that what he said was actually right. Could he really help me? I sighed. Even if he could help me, it's a pity that I only remember his appearance and nothing else. Li Fei's face turned black and blue at this time, and his eyes were very ferocious, but he still comforted him. I see that you have been in low spirits recently. Maybe someone caused the prank. Please go home and rest for a few days. You are tired from working on the contract these days. Yeah, I nodded numbly and had no reaction. After parting ways with Li Fei, I went home by myself and walked into an ordinary residential building. Suddenly, a biting cold wind blew in my face. I couldn't help but look up at the scorching sun in the sky. How could there be such a cold wind in the summer of August? Not daring to think about it anymore, I immediately ran back to my house. It wasn't until I got home that I felt at ease. Maybe it's just that I've been too busy lately and my brain is exhausted. I thought so. I originally planned to look for the psychiatrist's business card in the locker, but suddenly a gust of cold air blew in my ears. I actually felt a hand on my back. The pores all over my body seemed to be wide open, and the cold air kept pouring into my body as if it could freeze me. The light tube on the ceiling shook without warning and then exploded, plunging the entire living room into darkness. My heart is in my throat. I felt something blowing cold wind next to my ear and said faintly, "Gee, and Jilin, wake up, save me, save me." My pupils widened instantly because I saw a person wearing something like a shroud on a reflector in the living room. The hair didn't cover his face. I could even see his face completely. He is Wang Jia. Chapter 4, in a desperate situation. Wang Jia kept repeating the sentence and then slowly turned his head so that I could see more clearly that his face was still pale, but his skin had aged to the point of becoming wrinkled, like a man over 100 years old. He looked into the reflector, looked at me, and suddenly smiled strangely at the corner of his mouth, and the pupils in his eyes protruded outward, but you could still hear him constantly saying, "Ji, Lin, help me." Before I could react, Wang Jia suddenly screamed, with a ferocious look on his face. I closed my eyes tightly in fear and sat on the ground in fear. It was stagnant for a long time after that, until early the next morning, when the sun rose and the light shone into the living room from the window. I woke up hazily on the floor of the living room. Wang Jia's scream yesterday is still ringing in my ears. I looked at the light tube in the living room, and it was indeed broken. Everything that happened yesterday was too real. It seemed that I couldn't stay at home anymore. So I picked up the key and hurriedly locked the door and left. Wandering on the roadside late at night, the entrances to major shopping malls were still crowded. I leaned against a telephone pole, holding a cigarette in one hand and lighting it with the other. With a sizzle, the cigarette lit, and I took a puff aimlessly. I haven't dared to go home since morning. It was almost midnight, and the shopping mall was about to close. Once late at night, there would be no pedestrians on the street, which made me break out in cold sweat. I originally wanted to go back home, take my things, and spend the night at a colleague's house. But when I thought about the strange incident that happened this morning, I immediately gave up the idea. I don't know how long I have been wandering on the street, but I found that it was already close to midnight. There was only a row of dim street lamps emitting a faint light on the street, and a few scattered passersby were scattered on the street. I found that the streets at this moment were surprisingly quiet. It's like I can only hear my own deep breathing. I couldn't help frowning and looking at everything around me strangely. I always felt that the familiar environment revealed a strange and cold atmosphere. It's as if I'm in another world now. Could it be? I looked at the sparse people on the street and found that they were all walking slowly in the same direction in an orderly manner, and all of them were wearing yellowish clothes. Just when I was wondering, a side face appeared on my retina without any warning, and I found that there was a person in the crowd who stopped slowly and was smiling strangely at me sideways. My scalp suddenly started to feel numb, and it seemed that my brain could hardly bear these horrific things. The face then returned to its original state again. I ran back in panic, only to find that everything I met was moving slowly in the same direction. Just as I was speeding up my pace, suddenly a foot came across the roadside and threw me hard to the ground. My face was stuck to the ground, and the burning pain kept stimulating my nerves. I have never been so scared, and I looked around in panic. I actually saw a white illusory smoke ball floating in the air right in front of my eyes. There seemed to be a pair of eyes staring at me in the white smoke. Before I could react, the cloud of smoke gradually dissipated, and a man wearing a strange service appeared in the haze. What scares me even more is that this person is the weird driver I met yesterday. Chapter 5 being set up. If you want to live, follow me. I trembled, but before I could make a sound, the driver's steady voice reached my ears. I wondered, why do I follow you? The driver's face was not angry because of me, but smiled relaxedly. It seems that you haven't realized that the place you are in is not the human world at all. As soon as the driver finished speaking, I stared dumbfounded at all the strange signs around me, reminding me of the difference of this place. Am I going to die today in this strange space where the sky and the earth don't work? Or should I believe what the driver said? I struggled for a long time. The driver waited for me for a while, but finally I gritted my teeth and made up my mind to treat a dead horse as a living horse. I can go with you, but can you tell me why you want to save me? I asked tremblingly, looking at the driver's tall and straight body. The driver frowned and replied displeasedly, "Do you want to live? If so, come with me." When he said he wanted to leave, I hurriedly got up from the ground, ran quickly behind him, hugged his thigh, and exclaimed, "I'll go with you." The wrinkles between the driver's brows gradually smoothed out, and he bent down to take his legs away from my arms. Then he took out a piece of talisman paper from the backpack he carried, handed it to my eyes, and said, "The location we are in is not in the human world. We must pass through the ghost market when we go back from here. You are a human being. Passing through the ghost market in a swagger will definitely attract the attention of hundreds of ghosts. So you first put the talisman paper on your chest to cover the beating of your heart." Is it that simple? I clenched the talisman in my hand in surprise. As I said this, I folded the talisman and put it in my chest pocket. I raised my head and met the driver's gaze. I don't know why, but the street lamp that was still shining just now became darker and darker, like a candle, almost to the point of extinguishing. The driver's face became even more terrifying under the shadow, and he looked at me seriously and said, "It's not that easy. If nothing happens, you shouldn't find anything terrible. But under normal circumstances, you can't appear on Huang Quan Road for no reason. Unless someone deliberately sets up a trap for you, then things will be much more difficult." In the dark night, I felt my heart beating weaker and weaker, and my face felt a little colder. Hearing the driver's analysis, I pried open my head and thought for days, but I couldn't figure out why. At this time, the driver pulled me up from the ground and led me to another dark jungle. Following his pace, I asked doubtfully, "Who would go through so much trouble to get me to appear on Huangquan Road?" The driver didn't turn around, but Diao walked over and answered me. "Because you have a special status you don't know, right? Your horoscope time happens to be an extremely weird time, which can be used by others to practice. So I think someone must be interested in your physique, so they're doing this." Just as I was listening in rapt attention, my clothes were suddenly caught on a branch. I was about to turn around to untie them, but as soon as I turned around, a headless corpse with no head and blood on its neck was stretching out its arms to hook my clothes. My heart that had calmed down suddenly started beating violently again, and I shouted in panic, "Ah, corpse." The driver obviously heard my call for help and turned around sharply and ran towards me. And I looked at the arms of this headless corpse, which were all rotting carrion, emitting a strong and pungent smell that made it impossible for me to break free. Chapter 6, Ghost Market. The driver obviously heard my call for help and turned around sharply and ran towards me. And I looked at the arms of this headless corpse, which were all rotting carrion, emitting a strong and pungent smell that made it impossible for me to break free. Just when I was helpless, a wooden sword slashed through the air and landed on the neck of the headless corpse right in front of my eyes. Suddenly, bright blood began to appear on the neck of the headless corpse again and dripped down on the grass along the body of the headless corpse. The driver walked up to me calmly, looked at the panicked me, and couldn't help but sigh. Then he pulled the headless corpse away from me and kicked him to the ground. I was trembling and felt like my tongue was going to be numb. I was distracted when I heard the driver frowning and saying to me, "Get up quickly. It's just a little difficult now, not really dangerous." After hearing the driver's understatement, my heart immediately became anxious. What is not a real danger? I almost died just now, okay? I wanted to say a few words to calm the anger in my heart, but when I looked up and found that the driver had quickened his pace, I immediately put away my emotions. He followed him with panicked hands and feet. It wasn't until we reached the end of the jungle that we saw some light. My heart was also a little relaxed. He sighed and sweated for himself. At this time, the driver listened, looked down at me, and said helplessly, "Can you stop clinging to me so tightly?" I retorted, "Why is it so tight?" Then I lowered my head and found that half of my body was on the driver's back, and he almost couldn't carry me on his back. I smiled silently and awkwardly and immediately sent the driver over, standing helplessly behind him. At this time, the driver took out another piece of jade jewelry from his bag and handed it to me. He looked at me and said, "There is a ghost market ahead. Just in case, you take it with you first. If something unexpected happens, you keep running south. No matter who you meet on the road, you must ignore him until you see a bridge. Remember, as long as you cross that bridge, there will be no more danger." The driver said a lot of words in my ear. Although I heard it in confusion, I still understood that the driver was not sure, but he was already trying his best to save me. I nodded guiltily, took the jade suwa, and put it around my neck without answering. Following the driver's footsteps, we walked to a long street not far away. The entire first half of the street was dark, but there were still a few bright red lanterns floating in the air. There was obviously no wind at this time, but the lantern kept swaying as if it was being blown. There was no moon or stars in the sky. It was covered like a dark cloth. We reached about the middle of the street, and as soon as we turned the corner, we saw a lively crowd in front of us. There are many stalls on the bustling street buying things, and people on the roadside are walking around, talking and laughing. At this time, I looked back and found that there was a tall wall behind me. The deserted alley just now disappeared without a trace in an instant. I looked around anxiously and found no trace of the existence of that alley. The driver suddenly took my hand at this moment, pulled me to his side, and said softly, "Don't look around, just treat it like you normally go shopping." I looked at his expressionless face, and my heart twitched involuntarily. It's not that easy. Who would want to go shopping in a ghost market that does not belong to their own world? In the end, I reluctantly followed the driver and pretended that nothing was wrong. I was almost walking to the end of the street in the ghost market when suddenly a strange person passed me by. I wanted to avoid him, but I accidentally walked up to him. When I turned around, I saw one of his arms falling to the ground. He turned back and stared at me blankly. His eyes were empty, and he said to me with a smile that sounded like crying, "It's okay. Why did you leave?" After saying that, he lowered his head and picked up his fallen arm from the ground. Chapter 7, something bad is happening. I was so frightened that I almost lost my courage and hurriedly ran to find the driver. As soon as the driver turned around, he noticed that I was out of breath and asked me unhappily, "What's wrong with you?" I took a deep breath and immediately said, "It's okay. I bumped into someone." I don't know what happened at this time, but I always felt that the person just now was acting weird, and the driver seemed to have noticed something was wrong. Then he tightened his grip on my wrist, spread his legs, and started running quickly. At this moment, I suddenly heard a commotion behind my head, and a voice suddenly shouted, "There is a person here." Is there a person here? Doesn't that refer to me? I greeted my 18th generation ancestors with fear in my heart. Although I have not been able to honor my family in this life, at the age of 25, I am still an unknown clerk working in a small business. But I am also the only male in the family. Ahmed Ba'a. At this time, I couldn't help but look behind my head. I was surprised to find that the originally bustling market had become dilapidated, as if no one had listened to the scriptures for decades. At this moment, all the people in the crowd were staring at me with ferocious expressions. One of them showed the whites of his eyes without pupils, swaying like a dead corpse and swarming forward. The body also began to shed rotten flesh piece by piece. The pale bones were exposed, and a smelly gas quickly rushed into the nasal cavity. I resisted the urge of my brain to stop and vomit. He quickly followed the driver's footsteps. This is definitely the fastest I have ever run in my life, almost faster than when I ran the tadpole race. At this time, we had already run out of the ghost market, and in the blink of an eye, we came to a wasteland. The driver suddenly stopped with a gasp. I looked at him doubtfully, but before I could react, he pushed me out. At this time, the driver roared angrily amid the lamentations of the innocent souls behind me. "Run south. Remember, never look back." What the driver said to me was always in my mind. Knowing that the driver risked his life to save me made me want to leave even more. I kept running towards the south as hard as I could, and the whining sounds behind me got closer and closer to me, as if they were in my ears. I tried not to look back, But as I ran, I noticed that the surrounding environment had suddenly changed drastically. A busy commercial street suddenly appeared in front of me. My eyes suddenly lit up, and I quickened my pace while the iron was hot. It wasn't until I entered the commercial street that I noticed that the whining sounds behind me had disappeared. At this time, he looked back curiously, and what he saw was a human face with a crack in the mouth that reached to the base of the ear. Ah! I was so frightened that I squatted on the ground and suddenly realized something was wrong. Damn it! The driver clearly said that it was safe to cross the bridge. I looked around again. There was no noisy shopping mall anywhere. What is in front of us is clearly a lonely cemetery. Broken tombstones, large and small, were standing tremblingly on the mound. Many white pieces of burning paper came from nowhere and were scattered throughout the cemetery, which looked very strange. And the monster with the split mouth just now was slowly crawling towards me on the ground. That monster actually had no lower body, and blood is pouring out in large amounts. I heard the sound of my own throat swallowing saliva, and waves of eerie cold wind kept pouring into my collar like the cold arms of a dead person. Chapter 8: Surviving the Disaster. Damn it! I bit my lip, couldn't help but curse, and immediately got up from the ground. At this time, the surroundings were dim, with only a cemetery and a monster without a lower body still crawling towards me. I just wanted to run again, but I was caught by an inexplicable thing. I fell to the mud again. When I looked back, I found that it was the monster. At this moment, he was constantly falling because of his violent movements. At this moment, I seemed to be in a cage where I couldn't see my fingers. I stretched out my hands hard to break free, but found that the eerie and exposed white bones were so powerful that I couldn't break free. Instead, the pale bones seemed to sink into my flesh and blood. At this time, he was only a few feet away from me. From a close distance, I could clearly see the carrion on his face, exuding a strong smell of blood. He no longer only held my ankle tightly. After letting go, I saw dark purple marks on the ankle. Soon, his two hands were quickly placed on my neck. The force was